In California, I feel sorry for you guys. So the national average of gasoline in California, the Golden State, the biggest state in the country, is $5.20. National average, even after all the carnage in Iran, $3.48. Now, there's a study from the University of Southern California's Marshall School of Business, which is a good school of business, says by the end of this year, you Californians are going to pay $8 a gallon for gas. Why? Because of cap and invest, which is a state law requiring oil companies to go through amazing amount of hoops to market their product because it's a polluter. So the Marshall School says, get ready in California for $8 a gallon. So you know. Joining us now from Arlington, Virginia, is E.J. Antoni, who's a senior fellow at Unleash Prosperity. That's Stephen Moore's economic group. And he's also a chief economist for the Heritage Foundation. All right, so United States Americans are going to experience economic pain, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. And thank you so much for having me. Look, the unfortunate reality here is that energy affects everything we do and everything we buy. This is part of the reason why inflation was so painful under the Biden years. It was because of their war on reliable American energy. And one of the big problems we're facing now, Bill, is that although we are using less oil in a lot of our day-to-day use, for example, millions of Americans now have electric vehicles, so they're not spending anything on gasoline. The problem is that as time has gone on, we spend much more on energy for non-energy uses. I can give you one example. American farmers buy most of their synthetic fertilizer from Europe, and that fertilizer, the primary ingredient is urea. It's derived from natural gas. So they take natural gas in a lab, they chemically alter it, and that's how you get that, again, the main ingredient for synthetic fertilizer. Well, what's going on right now with natural gas prices in Europe? They've basically doubled. That is going to impose a dramatically higher input cost on American farmers, even though domestic prices for energy have not actually moved that much since the start of this war in Iran. So
Yeah.
Again,
So it's linkage all over the place, helps Putin because Putin's got oil to sell. And there's a lot of embargo on that. So, but believe me, they'll break the embargo, the countries will, if they're desperate for oil. Food prices are the ones that Americans are complaining about the most. We can expect those food prices to rise. The question is how much, right?
Exactly, Bill. You're spot on. And I'm so glad you brought up Putin because unfortunately, this is one of the saddest things about this whole conflict right now. Putin really is the big winner because he, in a lot of ways, is the marginal producer. And he's one of those, Russia's one of those nations where higher energy prices right now help, not hurt, because they are such a large net exporter. So these higher prices, unfortunately, in the short term, are literally funding his war machine against the Ukraine. And sadly, even though so many countries in Europe are giving aid to Ukraine, they are giving more to Russia in the form of those energy purchases.
And they need them. Now, the United States has an advantage because we are control of Venezuelan oil content, all right? And we have a robust domestic production because that's what President Trump did when he first got in, pulled the regulations off. Do we have enough oil here to keep prices under control?
Bill, the problem is that combination. Do we have enough oil? Yes, but at what price? In other words, because, look, we have rolled back a lot of Biden era regulations. That's true, but there's a long way to go. In other words, there is still such a high regulatory cost in this country that there's a lot of oil production that simply isn't profitable at 60, 80, or even $100 a barrel. But crank it up to 120, 130, and all of a sudden, all of these wells become profitable. So yes, we have enough oil, but the question is at what price. The other thing, and I'm so glad you brought up Venezuela, we do have that. One of the problems with sources like Venezuela, though, although it is a very large supply of oil, it's also the quality of oil here. Taking Iranian crude off the market is a big problem because of the high quality. Oftentimes, refiners will actually buy light sweet crude so that they can blend it with heavy sour crude to make it easier to process. So by taking the most valuable crude off the market, it hurts more than taking 2 or 3 times as much of the less valuable crude off the market.
Now, the Trump people say that when the conflict ends with Iran, that the prices will all come back down to where they were before the war. Do you believe that?
I believed it on Friday before the weekend. The reason that all changed on the weekend is because all of a sudden we saw these strikes against Iranian oil infrastructure. And then Iran returned the favor and started striking other oil infrastructure in the area. So now it's not just a matter of turning the pumps on and off, which is a multi-week process, to be clear. You don't turn on and off oil infrastructure like you do a light switch. It takes weeks or months. But now you're talking in some cases years because you have to literally rebuild what was just blown up over the weekend. So unfortunately, again, after the developments of this weekend, I'm not nearly as confident we'll be able to return Mideast oil production to where it was before the conflict.
But can't Saudi Arabia and the other Arab states fill the gap that Iran has because they are not going to be able to produce as much oil? I think OPEC could fill that gap, no?
To a certain extent, Bill, absolutely. Yes, there is a lot of excess production capacity right now, and so you could fill the bulk of that missing production. Absolutely, that's a very, very good point. The question just becomes, how extensive is the damage going to be before Iran cries uncle here? Look, we're basically, if you want to think of it in World War II terms, we're already in 1945. It is very clear the Allies are going to win, not the Axis. The question then becomes, can the Axis inflict enough damage that the Allies give up beforehand? And that was really the mentality that
no doubt
Germany and that Japan had.
Sure. That's the weapon they have now is the economy. Final question. The president is supposed to meet with Xi in China in Beijing in April. And China is dependent on Iranian oil. And they'll buy from Putin, and they'll make that up. But I expect an oil deal where our country sends oil to China. I think that's going to be part of any equation that happens over in Beijing.
Yeah, Bill, it's a great point, and it would certainly be very, very advantageous for the United States if we could start being that marginal producer instead of bad actors like Iran or like Russia. If the United States, and again, this is going to require rolling back more of those regulations, if the United States could be that marginal producer and now we have China over a barrel, as opposed to what was the situation just a few weeks ago, where China is buying so much from Iran and buying it under the table at a discount that it really, really benefits the CCP.
But China has not said a word. So I know there's stuff in play there that we don't know about. Mr. Antony, thanks very much. Very good interview, and I hope you'll come back. Thanks again.